But do you need a PR firm? Probably not. There are plenty of really good individual sole practitioners that can probably do that job really well.
Welcome to Beyond the Beat, a podcast by Chain Story, the agency to elevate your status in crypto. I'm your host, Pedro, and every week I'll be talking to the people in crypto media. We'll be telling their stories, their failures, their lessons, and whatever tips or tricks they've got up their sleeves.
Cool.
Perfect.
All right, great.
Cool. So I'll, small, brief, very brief intro, your name and your position, and then we'll get to it. Right. You're CMO for...
Yeah, so I'm Chief Communications Marketing Officer at Bloq, and then I am the head of marketing for Hemi.
Okay.
So,
Phil Gomes, head of marketing for Hemi and CCMO for Bloq.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, of course.
I'd like to just get the ball rolling if you want to do a short intro or lengthy intro into your media career or where you've laid the land in communications.
Wow. Okay. So, this is quite a story. I'll say that I didn't even know what communications and PR was when I was in college. I didn't know it was a career path. I went to a school that was really, really focused on business administration, accounting, that sort of thing. They had really strong departments there as well as other departments. And communications at the time, I hadn't really considered because it still had the reputation of the curriculum that you shuffled the over-recruited athletes into. And so I was looking for an internship because you had to get one. And there was this, in the Career Development Center, accounting job, biz admin job, accounting job, biz admin job. And there was this sad little dog-eared sheet of paper that was falling out that was for something called public relations. Didn't know what that was. But I needed an internship. It sounded communications related, so I took it. It was in a wine and food PR agency. So having soft pedaled the topic of my age,
minor detail.
Yeah, minor detail. I found myself in possession of said job, and it was great. And then that summer ended, and I.
What year was this?
That would betray my age, sir.
We'll gloss it over then.
Yeah. And then I took a sysadmin job at the school library. And then I was like, okay, I like this technology thing. I like this PR thing. How do I slam the two together? And that's what started my career. And so I was 10 years in Silicon Valley. I was 19 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days in Los Angeles. And then starting in 2007, I moved to Chicago, and then within the last year and a half, Brazil. So,
right.
I worked at Edelman, the world's largest public relations firm. So I helped create, sort of their initial vision around two important technology and communications epics, right? One being social media, the other being blockchain and crypto. So I always used to joke that if Edelman were the FBI, I would be its Fox Mulder chasing after the little green men. And the little green men were things like Wikipedia, which was kind of outside the usual public relations context. Things like understanding movements like Anonymous, things like that. And crypto came into my field of vision maybe 2014, actually. So wow, 10 years. Well, when you say it like that, it just hit me just now. Wow. Yeah, 2014 was when I first kind of became aware of it. I didn't really look at the monetary aspects of it. But what fascinated me about it was, as a career communicator, I was like, well, wait a minute, this is cool. A way to represent data built by consensus that is considered immutable and only becomes more secure over time. that sounds really useful to me. And that's when I started really getting into it. The money piece of it didn't hit me until later. The Bitcoin piece of it, I was like, that's more complicated PayPal. Maybe I'm not as interested. But yeah, I really started to get into it. I started building a book of business around it, and for a firm like Edelman, just to look at crypto, it was kind of an interesting experience seeing it from that perspective. And so one thing led to another. We actually built a WordPress plugin that could anchor your WordPress posts to the blockchain, right? So you'd have an audit trail of have you been stealth editing, kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? That's now open source. That's out there right now. And one thing led to another, and I ended up going to work for one of my clients,
Right.
Bloq. My flagship client when I was there was Bitmain.
Oh,
Actually,
interesting.
yeah.
Wow.
That
Big
was-
account.
It was, and the person who hired me over there, Nishant Sharma, is still very dear friend today, and it originally started as a promotional assignment, like promoting Bitcoin as a business, or Bitmain as a business, and then it slowly morphed into that was also a time where there were some measures of crisis. There was the ant bleed issue. There was that sort of thing. So then it became a promotional assignment. Then it became a crisis assignment. Then promotional, back again. But it was the ultimate backstage pass to this industry. And so that was it was really rewarding working with them. And then one of my other clients was Bloq, and thus here I am. So.
Interesting. What was it like in those early days? Like, because I'm supposing you had to convince or persuade or talk at Edelman's about crypto.
Yeah.
How did they take it in those early days? Like, was it something that they immediately hooked onto, or they're like, okay, experiment with it, let's see how it goes, and
The
then...
latter.
Yeah.
The latter. Experimentation was very much a part of the firm's DNA at the time. I mean, they were exploring social media and blogging, I think long before their notional competitors were at the time. By that I mean the global multinational PR firms. But I also tell people that in previous web epochs, money was merely involved, right? You've got Web 1.0, the .com build out. You've got Web 2.0, which is the the social media build out, that sort of thing. And in those instances, money was merely involved in that process. Here comes Web 3, here comes crypto. Now you're talking about money itself. And that alone changes everything. So, I had written a number of global policies for Edelman, things like social media behavior, employee policy, and that sort of thing. But we also created a list of, what would it take for us to consider a crypto assignment, right? And it was variables like, we're not going to work with anons, right? So you have to have a track record in business. We weren't terribly interested in ICOs, and so we're talking about 2017, 2018 now. We weren't terribly interested in that. And so that's how we evaluated these opportunities coming in the door. Now, what we did run into, which was interesting, which I could not have anticipated, was these projects would come in and they would say, well, we want to pay you in our token. No.
Of course they do.
But there were a few who were saying who really they just wanted the firm's brand on their materials, because it's like, okay, if we pass the due diligence of the world's largest PR firm, then we must be doing something right. So that was something that a lot of firms tried to do, was they wanted to show, oh, we're working with the big boys. That's right. So we had to be very, very conscious of that. But there were some truly bizarre assignments that came through. I remember one wanted to tokenize weight loss.
No way.
And we had some registered dietitians on staff at Edelman, because food was a big piece of their business. So I brought some of them in. You know, I was like, well, what's going on here? And there was no way that wouldn't result in an eating disorder of some kind. You know, so we couldn't
As
take on that
do things
business.
with all tokenization.
Right,
Some disorder.
or if I wanted to short somebody's weight loss token, do I just tempt them by sending like a whole bunch of pizzas and Ben and Jerry's to their house? I mean, it was, so there were some strange ideas coming around at that time. And,
Yeah.
you know, some of them, you know, of course, crossed our desk, but yeah, that was. It was a really, really strange time. But you know, what attracted me to Bloq was, okay, here are known parties, known entities, you know, and that's one of the reasons why Edelman started working with them in the first place. And so I had always been a creature of agency habit. My entire career was agency side. So somewhat late in my career, I decided to quote unquote go client side.
Right.
You know, good, 20 some odd years into it. So that was an interesting adjustment, but at the same time, since Bloq is a company that spins out various projects, that sort of thing, only agency experience could have prepared me for my job, right? Because you learn task switching and prioritization very, very quickly.
Especially, I can imagine at Edelman's, like it's the largest in the world, I feel like it had such degree of structures and protocols and due diligence processes. And
also in a role like mine, in a place like that, sometimes you have specialists that say, okay, I am specialized in pharma, I am specialized in public affairs, I am specialized in public affairs in the energy industry, things like that. And a handful of us had kind of a weird role that straddled various different businesses, right? I did crisis work, for example. And so I started tallying this up, and I figured I had jumped into between 70 and 85 clients in a given year.
Wow.
Just, not that I'm working on all 85 at the same time, but, I would halo jump into different assignments, and again, that task switching became, learning that capability, having that mindset, turns out to work out pretty well in the startup space, as it turns out. So,
yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like a very useful skill to have, to be able to jump in and out.
Right.
I want to ask, like, zooming out, because PR agencies came on my radar when I started being a journalist, like less than 5 years ago.
Right.
And I've always been intrigued by their existence. Like,
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, they're just, because I never run into, I obviously understood that companies needed to do marketing efforts, but I didn't really understand the connection between like the media industry or crisis communications or anything like that.
Okay.
How important is PR for any stage of company? Like for a startup, for example, like having a PR agency or having a PR team, or can companies just do it themselves? And
all of the above. Xiao Wang, who he does the DeFi Alliance, he has this wonderful memo that he open sources, that he gives to all of the cohorts that run through his program. And like the first, and he talks about marketing, he talks about tokenization, he talks about tokenomics, he talks about everything. But number one on the top of the list is the marketing discussions that he has and the PR discussions that he has. And he says far too often, the first question is, what's the best PR firm, right? and he goes, no. You're being too marketing focused. You're not being user focused enough, right? And I think there's a lot of wisdom in what he wrote, and you know, that he since open sourced that memo, and I want to staple gun it to you know, every founder's head, crypto or not. And so, you know, I don't think like an early stage company. I think hiring a PR firm is premature. Everybody, if they have the right startup mindset, should be doing all that themselves if they're ready to do it at all. Again, I mean, the counsel that he gives is you have to be relentlessly user-focused first before you start to become promotionally focused, right? And that does take a while. I don't recommend that early stage startups do that. And in the off chance that they do, it has to be a relationship that has like a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Right.
You know, so sometimes their investors will push them towards, no, you need to be talking to the media. Okay, if you're not a little bit experienced in that, you probably need help. But do you need a PR firm? Probably not. There are plenty of really good individual sole practitioners that can probably do that job really well. So, you know, I guess my first advice is that, you know, there's also would be that to kind of hold off on that. The other would be that I just think that people misunderstand public relations. And why is that? They conflate it with media relations. And so who has the loudest platform to talk about the state of PR? It's people who happen to be in the media. You know, so they see all these pitches come into their inboxes, and they think, wow, right? They think there's this gigantic media machine, right, that is coming after me, you know, doing these spray and pray shotgun approach, indiscriminate kind of pitches. And so they tend to conflate those things. And I often say that, you know, any public relations firm that is solely focused on media relations is engaging in a going out of business model. They seem to think that with newsrooms getting ever thinner, with I forget which newspaper it was, but they were telling their Chicago bureau, we're getting rid of all of our photography staff. So here, you know, junior reporter on the crime beat, here's your iPhone, you're our photographer now, right?
That's
right.
wild.
Yeah, and check me on this. I think it was the Chicago Sun-Times, but check me on that. You know, so with these newsrooms getting thinner and thinner and thinner, there's this thought that you know, public relations firms, they cannot rely on media relations. They just can't for their revenue. So a lot of them are turning into content marketing shops. A lot of them are turning into growth marketing, performance marketing, that sort of thing. You know, making that transition and having that 360-degree view of marketing. Right?
What percentages do you think should be the ones that are like? I don't know, let's say before it was 100% media relations, and then now it's, say, 50-50 or 30-30.
I think it really does depend on your industry.
Okay.
I think that if somebody is working in pharmaceuticals, automotive, you know, things like that, you know, a lot of it's going to be reactive. A lot of it, you know, because those happen to be somewhat controversial industries. There is, and it might be a lot less for other companies. I mean, it is fascinating to me that it is fascinating to me that in the current climate, you hear a lot of complaining about in the tech space, right? About the media is mean to us, you know. And to which I say, you know, I always have this vision in my head of like a tech media PR person sitting next to somebody who does work for the pharmaceutical lobby, sitting next to somebody who does work for automotive, and you know, if you really want to get controversial, tobacco and guns, right? And you know, one of them is talking about their day and the other day, and is the tech person really going to sit there and go, Taylor Lawrence from the Washington Post was mean to me today, you know? Right. So we're in kind of an interesting moment in the tech PR and media relations space where they're just mean to us, and it's frankly they just haven't worked the same muscle groups, I think.
How does that apply then to like crypto? Sure. Because our industry is filled with PR agencies. I don't know if it's more than other industries because I've only worked like in media in crypto, so I don't know if it's more or less. For me, it seems like a lot.
Right.
But yeah, is the amount of PR agencies that exist and how they operate common across industries, like crypto compared to tobacco and guns or pharmaceuticals, or
you know, there are individual practitioners in every space. There are mid-size agencies, large-size agencies. This is going to be the rare mid to large-size agency that engages in crypto. A lot of your shops in crypto tend to be sole practitioners. They tend to be, you know, people maybe a head count of 5 or 6. You know, they may be a loose collection of independent practitioners, perhaps. You know, it's all different kinds. But even then, I do find it's rare that it is a 100% focus on media relations.
Right.
I do find that, and again, that's adapting to the current environment. But you know, and you know, some people who are drawn to that are incredibly good at, incredibly savvy. They understand the technology itself. They understand the roots of it. They know how to tell a story. There are some shops that are just sort of spray and pray. But again, that's true of any industry, right?
Right.
That's and so you know, it has been rare. Actually, I can count on one hand in 6 years that Bloq or any one of its spinoffs has hired a PR firm. Actually, we are aggressive in-housers. You know, we have certain tools of the trade in-house that we don't have to rely on it from outside, and that's a strategic decision because we want to retain as much of the institutional knowledge as we possibly can. You know, what certain relationships are with certain publications and reporters.
Makes sense.
Yeah, but no, it's actually been very rare, and every one of our projects, you could say, are early stage, right? So you go back to my advice from before, right? If you must engage in a PR firm, then just make sure it's a relationship that has a clear beginning, middle, end, right? We're launching this product. We are, you know, going on this tour. We are announcing venture funding. We are, you know, yeah, all those things, right? You know, asking those questions.
What do you think is the biggest problem that like crypto companies are having nowadays when it comes to communicating their stuff? Like, because I get a bunch of jargon all the time from either PR reps or founders or anybody, so it's like, I mean, even I have to just like sit down and understand and just really, really put it on, like make it understandable to myself, digestible, and then into the open.
There are a number of misconceptions, I think, when it comes to the interaction between media relations professionals and journalists. One of them, I think, is, and I think founders suffer from this as well, is that they think that crypto journalism is like the house organ of the industry, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, witness what happens when any crypto publication writes an op-ed that steps a little bit out of line, right? A little bit out of line from crypto orthodoxy. You know, that poor author gets pummeled because there's this sense. It's like, oh, it's the industry's house organ. They're on our side. You know? And then I remind people that mainstream media completely missed FTX. Completely missed it, right? They were more concerned about maintaining their access to SBF than CoinDesk was, right?
Yeah.
You know, think about that for a second. So it completely inverts the way people think about media in our trade, right? And I think that's a story that frankly isn't told enough. And I say this, you know, you and I are ACJR board members. That's a story that isn't nearly told enough. But I mean, that's one misconception. The other misconception is that everybody on the crypto journalist side has a incredible degree of technical sophistication, right? That's another misnomer. Not misnomer. That's another misconception. That everybody on the other end is either a degen or a protocol expert and things like that. And there are degens and protocol experts in journalism, but
the vast majority isn't.
right. And then there's there's a piece of this that I could say is something that you only learn over time, is the instinct for what is a story, right? You know, and I'm sure you get a lot of pitches in your inbox that you want to respond with. Do you want fries with that? You know, right? Because there's the expectation that they send it to you and you copy paste post. Right?
Yeah.
And that's, again, that's something that you only learn by, number one, having your hand in it, and number two, reading. You know, everybody who has ever received a pitch from a media relations person always asks the same question: do they even read my work?
Yeah, I ask it all the time.
Right. And that's
for nearly every single pitch.
right. And that's the failing, right? Is that, very often it's like, okay, do you even read the last thing I wrote? What I tell people who are maybe starting out in media relations, and I can't claim credit for this because this was articulated by a guy named Sam Whitmore, who was one of the earlier editors of technology trade magazines, PC Week and a few others. And then he created this service called the Sam Whitmore Media Survey, which was a newsletter for tech PR people. Mm-hmm. And he had this wonderful lesson that I still tell people today, where he says, everybody knows the guy with the pickup truck, right? And there's somebody on your city block who's the guy with the pickup truck. And when does that person hear from their neighbors, right? To come to the barbecue, to see their kid get baptized, or, hang out at the park. No, the only time the guy with the pickup truck gets the phone call from the neighbors is when the neighbor wants to move.
Yeah.
Right? And those neighbors, they only get to make that phone call twice. Right? And the third time, the guy with the pickup truck goes, come on. You only talk to me when you need something.
Yeah.
Right? And he goes, that's how media relations works. If you're only talking to people when you want something from them, then that there's no relationship there at all.
It's funny because I have there's certain PR people that I have developed a relationship with, and with them it's usually like we talk about everything aside from work, and then
Right.
every now and then it comes
it
a
comes
page.
up. Yeah,
Like, hey,
right.
this is coming up or something like that. And then on the other side, which is the vast majority, it's just people spraying, And I'm like,
right.
sometimes I'm surprised that they even put the hey Pedro, and they just didn't go just hey, and then just sent it off,
Oh, I get hey first name a lot, and I always respond with that's Mr. First Name to you, pal. No, so as you know, and many of your viewers know, I moved to Brazil in September 2022. But long before that, when my wife and I were dating, she introduced me to Brazil's national spirit, cachaça, which is like a light rum. It's made from crushed sugarcane juice. And so my mother-in-law is the president emeritus of the Rio de Janeiro Cachaça Appreciation Society.
Wow.
So I figured, so here I am, I'm figuring my Portuguese sucks, I like this stuff, and I need to get in good with the in-laws. What do? I'm going to create a blog. So I created a blog about cachaça. And after a while, it turned out to be, I had the distinction of being the #1 English-speaking blog about Brazilian booze.
No way.
And the number of pitches I got for whiskey, vodka, tequila,
all of them.
Yes, exactly. And I was like, oh my God, somewhat late in my career, I acutely feel the pain of...
You're on the receiving end.
Right. I was like, oh shit. Yeah, I mean, it was like, and I think every journalist starts this way, where maybe they politely respond, sorry, this is just about cachaça. I'm not going to be exploring vodka. Sorry. It's like, and after a while, it's just like, delete.
Yeah, I usually just completely ignore them.
Yeah.
And like I've been invited, for example, to like the Crypto Comms Collective,
Yeah.
and I remember, and a few of my PR friends are like, "What can I do better?" And for me, it's all about the headline.
Right,
like if you
right.
give me a good headline or something that attracts me to like actually opening the email, that's the game changer. Because
Right.
as soon as I open it, you've done, like, it's like David Ogilvy says, like 80% or 80 cents out of your dollar gets spent on the headline. And
Right.
that's it. That's where you need to put all your focus on.
But the
At
other
least for me.
experience I had was at the end of the day, whether you're a journalist or an enthusiast or whatever, at the end of the day, you want access to the things you like and the people who are responsible for it, right? And in my experience running this cachaça blog, which I have not been able to touch in literally 9 years, was the brands that were successful were like LeBlanc Cachaça was great, because they said, do you want to talk to Tony Abu Ghanem, who he's the guy that runs that, at least at the time, ran the cocktail program for all of Steve Wynn's resorts in Vegas, right? So, and he's occasionally the guy that you'll see on like the Food Network, like judging cocktail competitions and that sort of thing. And I'm just like, yeah, of course I want this. You say yes, yeah. And it was a wonderful interview, and it went up on the blog, and it was great, and it did well. It brought attention to my site. There was some mutuality there. They helped me out. I helped them out. They were Bacardi brand. Bacardi had a majority stake and then bought the rest of it. They didn't need to pay attention to little pipsqueaky site like mine, but again, they provided that access. It's like, hey, are you going to come down to Brazil? Great. Do you want to, come to our distillery? Great. So that level of access and interest was really helpful. I did get free booze.
As expected.
At one point, it took up a goodly chunk of our floor in the kitchen.
Really?
and so yeah, my wife and I were like, we maybe need to make an IKEA trip. So yeah.
Interesting. I want to touch on like the media as a whole.
Sure.
What do you think about the media? Like, I know that's a very vague question.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. It's. I can address this from two perspectives. I am an avid consumer of media. I am also somebody who is, as part of his job, I mean, media relations is actually a very small part of my job today. But in some sense, if I can be completely honest and crass with you about this, I am also somebody who is to some degree paid to influence it, the media to some degree. So speaking from two perspectives, you know, I always kind of approach it in terms of what is the media environment that I want to consume as a consumer. Start there and work backwards, right? And I do think that you know, well, for as long as I've been in this business, the death of journalism has been 5 years from today. You know, since God knows how long, right? And the internet was supposed to kill it. Then Craigslist was supposed to kill it, and then. But now it's the nature of it is changing. I think that the United States in particular is starting to accept a very British way of looking at the media, which they'll pick up any number of papers and know that, okay, well, here comes the Guardian, and so it's like we know it's going to be a very left-leaning view of the world, where they kind of dispense of this notion of objectivity, right? And so rather you get the more Glenn Greenwaldish perspective, which is, I consider myself a good reporter, and I'm just going to wear my biases on my sleeve, right? And that transition, I think, has been, on balance, helpful, right? Rather than running around thinking that there is this and I feel like, I don't know if it's a uniquely American thing, but it's a very American thing to think about the desire to have a objectively objective way of looking at reporting. And so now that we have and thanks to social media, right, we get to know reporters, we get to know journalists, and if you pay attention, you can kind of tell where they're going to go with a given story. And I really do think that again, it's been a welcome change in the U.S. media. You can the platforms like Substack have been very interesting. When you look at stories like an Andrew Sullivan, right, or who is late of New York Magazine, or Matt Taibbi, right. You look at their stories, how they went from New York Mag and Rolling Stone respectively, ultimately to Substack and building their own brands. You look at an even more controversial figure like Barry Weiss, right? Too centrist for the Wall Street Journal editorial page, too centrist for the New York Times editorial page, so she had to kind of go off on her own. I think that again, we now are in a position where are we following brands or are we following people, and what does that mean for the media, right? Especially
as people become brands. So it's like the amalgamation of the two. So you're just like following the people who are then becoming the brands, and so it's like this. Yeah, it's like all part of the same, isn't it? Right.
And I think of any number of publications that I read, and I'm used to seeing these bylines, right? And I think to myself, that person leaves, I'm gonna hit that site a lot less.
Yeah.
I'm gonna consume a lot less of what this company has to say, right? So they're not gonna get my clicks, whatever fraction of a penny they're getting out of that. They might lose my subscription, right? Because I find that, okay, well, if it matters to these people whose writing I enjoy, it's gonna matter to me, right?
Yeah.
And
what about crypto media?
how do you mean?
Like
How does it work?
Yeah, because
Crypto media again. I look at the CoinDesk FTX movement, right? And you kind of look at it all the way down, and it's that's one of the reasons why I knife fought to be on the ACJR board, because I see a lot of people who really want to do the right thing, right? And who care about the industry enough to point out its flaws, right? Now, granted, there are any number of sites that sort of dress themselves in journalistic regalia, but don't necessarily, practice journalism, right? But overall, I think that I think there's a recognition that there's a lot to lose by getting it wrong.
yeah.
There's a lot to lose in terms of credibility and that sort of thing. But I mean, also I deal a lot with who I consider to be, people who I consider to be and people and brands who I consider to be the best in the trade, right? So somebody might think that my attitude here is perhaps blinkered or naive, but many times they don't have very realistic expectations of how the media works, right?
Yeah.
As we discussed earlier, that crypto trade media is not the house organ of our trade, right?
Do you think it's just a satellite then, or is it still like a core part of the industry? Not the house organ, but do you consider it like floating around in the sort of margins? Or
no, everybody considers it very important. Everybody in our trade considers the media very important. So I don't think it's merely on the periphery, right? It's an interesting question. I mean, it's a participant in the ecosystem, but with a very different and very important role.
We're running up on time, unfortunately. So, and I always end the conversations on the same two questions.
Okay, hit me.
I'm a voracious reader. I love to read, so
Okay.
I'm always interested in what other people are reading.
Oh.
So,
Wow.
first question is, what are you reading at the moment? Or whether it's you just finished it or you're just starting it. And then what book do you usually recommend to people? It can be crypto related,
Okay.
it cannot be
great. Okay.
open.
Okay, so what am I reading right now? Everything. I have a very crazy Instapaper habit where articles that I just see online that are too long for me to read, I just punt them to my Kindle, right? So the thing I was reading on the plane was an article about Carlos Castaneda, a author / cult leader who created all these books about interviews with Don Juan, and it turns out it was completely fabricated. He was you read this article, he's presented as a total fabulist with a cult and a harem of women behind him, and it's a very long piece. It's about 2 hours worth of a read, but it is a very in-depth article. I forget where I picked it up actually. But I was like, yeah, this looks interesting. It's got
Sounds interesting.
Hey, sex, drugs, whatever. But the book that I recommend to people, I'm going. Can I give you two?
For sure.
All right, cool. So, all right, you listening at home, this is a 2-for feature. Okay. Number one, The Future and Its Enemies by Virginia Postrel was in 1999, actually. It has affected me more than any other book in terms of framing how I look at the world. And so in The Future and Its Enemies, she identifies two kinds of people, dynamists and stasists, is what she says. And says, dynamists are people who thrive on and embrace change, right? And whereas stasists tend to be either like Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, tradition, or they say, okay, well, innovation's fine, but here's all the ways that I want to draw fences around it, that sort of thing. And seeing the world in that way, suddenly I just was, pow, okay, that's great. The other book that I recommend to people is, and I think that as a species, business and marketing books are just kind of awful. But the one that I recommend still, and this is one that I discovered in mid to late 2000s, The Pirate's Dilemma by Matt Mason.
Okay.
And The Pirate's Dilemma, basically, he says, the central thesis is, here's how piracy in media has created all this innovation, right? And he says, well, if you see piracy in your industry, it could be a sign that your distribution mechanism is flawed, right? Look at it that way, rather than, I'm going to get these guys, right? Look at it that way, that your distribution mechanism is flawed and you ought to change it. And he has all these, it was the first business book that I had read that used metaphors that mattered to me, right? And I ended up hiring the author, Matt Mason, for a talk to give at my PepsiCo client, believe it or not.
Wow.
Around that time, and we've kept in touch ever since.
Oh, amazing!
He has an NFT project right now. He was the CMO at BitTorrent for a spell. I think he was at Kraken. He's had an amazing career since. But yeah, those are the two books I would recommend.
Amazing. And great way to end.
All right.
Phil, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
This is an absolute pleasure.
All right, have a good one.
Awesome.
Is that all right?
That was great. Yeah.